All right. Again, I'm Jason Roberts from Dallas, Texas. Are y'all familiar with Texas? Raise your hand. I saw some boots here, so I felt like I was at home. Yeah, really honored to be here. I was actually invited out in September last year. Jesper brought me out and got to do a tour around Denmark and a little bit of Sweden with Think Space. And because of that, Real Danya, who was the sponsor, I guess, for you guys, asked me to come back. So I'm grateful to be here. I started an organization. Now, I talk fast, too. Texans mostly talk slow, but I talk fast. So if I start seeing you look confused, I'll try to slow down a bit. So, but I started an organization called Team Better Block in 2011 with one of my close friends, based on trying to fix the urban environment rapidly in our communities, because we saw great things happening in California and great things happening in New York and around the world, but nothing was happening in Texas. So that's why we started mobilizing ourselves. My background, though, is I was not an urban planner or an architect. I actually hung out in rooms that looked like this. So I was an IT consultant. I worked on computers in cold rooms filled with wires and just did not have a very exciting day life. Yeah, if you click on it, At nighttime, though, I had a rock band, so that was my one cool thing I could do. So I got to tour around the country and just play rock shows and see really cool places and get really good ideas. You can switch. So what really kind of inspired my ideas on places, though, was coming to Europe and seeing the great plazas that were in Rome, full of fountains and markets and young people, old buildings that were constantly being used and full of life. And then also going up to like Amsterdam and Copenhagen, places like this, and seeing the great bicycle networks you had, grandparents riding bikes with grandkids and things like that. So when I got back to Dallas, I started saying, what are we building? And I saw a lot of these things, right? And this was really frustrating because I really liked what you had. And I was trying to figure out how do we get those things in my own community. And because you can't really fit in this picture a lot of cafe seats or a lot of bike lanes. And we spend billions of dollars on this. So I decided to start showing up and seeing if I can actually start promoting these ideas. And I started going to community meetings and saying, hey, can we get some changes on the ground? One of the problems I was faced with, though, was that we were doing a lot of planning, a lot of talks, a lot of discussions, a lot of drawing pictures. We were also being told that it was too hot to do anything worthwhile in our community, and that it was that we had a car culture that you just could not break. So I did start going to the first few meetings and started saying, hey, let's do bike lanes. And these guys kind of came out and said, no! Or I'd say, let's do outdoor cafe seating, or let's thin the roads, and absolutely not. We had a lot of fear. In fact, whenever I found out a lot of the things we were building in my community were based on fears. So people were afraid of being slowed down in their cars, so we built wide streets. People were afraid of pedestrians getting hit by cars, so we built thin sidewalks so pedestrians wouldn't walk there. So we kind of got the environment we asked for. What we did also got was we lost our culture and our sense of place. What really kind of honed my ideas on how to get things done was attending some of these design charrettes where we brought a lot of consultants in, a lot of planners, and we had discussions where we draw on maps and take pictures and kind of talk about how to make places better. We'd spend tens of thousands of dollars on these exercises. This is a project we did in 2009. If you look at this was just an abstract project, drawing and just talking. People would often come up with their worst case scenarios of what could go wrong. And because of that, we make the worst plans ever because we're trying to accommodate everything, right? So nothing was really getting built. So if you look at that street now that we were designing today, 4 years later, next slide looks like this. So still doesn't look like a place you'd ever want to be. It's not something you'd ever put on a postcard. This is what a lot of my community looks like, though. So broken sidewalks on one side, really wide streets that have very few cars on them, very few businesses that engage the streets. I have cafe seating here, but who really wants to sit there, honestly? Okay, so one of the big things I had to realize when I started showing up, though, and trying to get involved was that I had a lot of people that were cheerleading or saying, yes, we need to get change, let's do cool things. but they weren't really willing to do the extra set of work to be the champion, to make things really happen. And I found out it's easy to be a cheerleader. It's easy to say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did this, or great to do that. It doesn't take that much effort to be the champion, though. Just to show up a few more times, go to a few more meetings, and fill out the applications and to do a little bit more work, and you can actually get real change on the ground. So a lot of my work was realizing that I needed to stop just cheering ideas and actually putting some effort into making things happen. One of the first projects I did, I had an old building called the Texas Theater that was a few blocks from where I lived. This building was vacant for about 10 years, so nobody was in it. The only reason, okay, so it's kind of famous. This is where, if you know about JFK, this is where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured. The thing is, in Dallas, people don't like talking about that because it's considered a bad thing for the community, especially where I live in Oak Cliff, because that's where Lee Harvey Oswald's from. It's also where Bonnie and Clyde are from, so we have a lot of criminals. And I had to learn that, maybe we just need to start championing our history, no matter how bad it was. and so I started getting involved. The reason we have a sign, in fact, is because Oliver Stone did JFK, the movie here, and he built a sign for us, which birds started eating. I decided to try to get involved with this old theater. The problem was there was a group trying to fix it, but they needed to raise millions of dollars, and it was going to take them a long time, and they were not getting any traction at all. So I started trying to figure out how could I do something with the space now, the way it is, and work on a project in days, not years, and get things happening in this building. So I found an artist in New York named Steve Keen. He had a really cool project. Basically, he'd go into an art gallery the day before he had an art show. He'd fill it with 100 blank canvases and then paint them all that night and then do an art show the next day. So I love the idea of having kind of an empty space and then doing something just that night and the next day having a big event. So I thought, I probably can't find one artist to do 100 paintings, but I might be able to find 100 artists to get them to do one painting each. So I did that. I went in with some friends and we built easels. This is actually the auditorium, the lobby of the Texas Theater. And this is like my band members. We're all working together on this. Now, minutes before we're about to open this, the doors to this project, we thought, you know what, this may have been a horrible idea. This is a vacant theater that's been closed for 10 years. It's winter. It's in the bad part of town. Nobody wants to be in Oak Cliff. This might be a horrible failure. But what happened was, when we opened the doors, we had 700 people show up. And we sold every piece of art that we made that night, and we gave all the money to a local charity. But what was also amazing is we had a lot of great people come out and say, we've been waiting for somebody to do something with this old building. We were wondering who was going to spearhead this project, what else is happening here, how can we get involved, how can we help. So just by me using the resources I had, I didn't have money and I didn't have years to work. I just had days and I had a lot of people. We were able to activate the place, and then we found great people that wanted to continue to do projects there. So now this theater is actively running. It's the anchor for the area. People all come here regularly, and it's being restored slowly but surely, but it's in use right now. Okay, so kind of drunk with excitement and thinking, wow, if I can fix an old building, what else can I do? I went out to my community. I found these old maps. And I started talking to some property owners in the area about, different things that were different ways to bring people to my part of town and to get more businesses happening and more people living there. And they said they had all these ideas. They wanted to bring Starbucks and things like that. And I thought, you know what? When I look at the old maps from 1920, 1930, I saw we used to have this great old streetcar system, like an old like you have called trams or trolleys. You guys had them until 1973, I noticed. And at the corners, at the intersections, there were all these old buildings that were, now they were all vacant or abandoned and blighted. But I thought, well, why don't we just bring the streetcar back? And my friends said, that's a crazy idea. It'll never happen. It's been gone for 50 years. It would cost millions of dollars, and nobody would ever back that idea, especially where you live. That just makes no sense. So I knew nothing about streetcars and very little about urban planning. But since I was a computer specialist, I did know how to build websites. So I built a website called the Oak Cliff Transit Authority, and it looked really official, right? It had an about page and board and news. I had pictures of European streetcars and all kinds of great things, right? And then the next day, the newspaper came out, and they did a story and said, "Dreaming of the day the streetcar returns." That's what Jason Roberts and other members of the recently formed Oak Cliff Transit Authority are hoping. But there were no other members. So. But the great thing about that project was I had enough amazing people contact me and say, "Hey, we've been actually wanting to help do a big project in the area. How can we take part?" So I had civil engineers call me. I had streetcar enthusiasts from around the country call me. And in short time, we created a real group that was advocating for a legitimate streetcar. All right. So while that's going on, I'm also studying the bicycling stuff happening all over the world as well. I'm thinking like, well, I want to have bicycling happening in my community too. Nobody bicycles. The only people that bicycle are these guys that are typically wearing this kind of outfit, and they're hot and they're sweaty. But whenever I came here, I saw like every time that rings, we have to take a shot, by the way. So we're going to be wasted. But I saw, these heavy bikes. I saw, people wearing regular clothes and looking normal. And I didn't see that in my community. So I thought, well, why don't, I've got the streetcar, the trolley working. I'll try to do the same thing with bicycles in my community as well. So we created a group called Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. And again, we thought if we're lucky, we'll have 10, 20 people show up. And we'll all promote the idea of riding old, heavy bikes together. But what happened was when we had our first event, we had about 150 people show up. And what you don't see is me at the front of this line looking terrified because I'm thinking I'm not the leader of a bike movement. And I didn't own a bicycle when we started Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. I just liked the idea of having that culture. But what happened was, and I tell people this all the time, if you're really passionate about something, you have all it takes to become a leader. And people are looking for someone to rally around and get behind and help push. So we created a movement based on this. And in a short time, I actually was able to go to the local schools where we had no kids bicycling at all. And I gave them all punch cards and said, hey, if you all ride your bikes, you'll get punch cards and we'll all do group fun rides together. So at the end of a week, I had 100 kids bicycling. So, but doing something simple, just again, punch cards and saying, and the interesting thing was we weren't the bike part of town. I just kept telling people we were, and it became kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I tell people all the time, you can just say that you're something, and sometimes that can happen. Okay, so while I'm working on these old buildings, old theaters, and the streetcar and the bicycle stuff, shot. I also had the old clusters, these old buildings everywhere, and I thought, what can I work with these? These are all empty. Nobody's using them. The city changed the zoning, so I wasn't allowed to have coffee shops or cool things inside of them. The streets were made into one-way, high-speed streets with thin sidewalks and no landscaping. So, and then beyond that, if you go to the next slide, you don't read all this, but basically these are all of these ordinances the city put up that made it cost prohibitive to do anything cool. So flowers on the sidewalk would have been $1,000. Shade awnings would have been $1,000. Outdoor cafe seating, $1,000 times the area, times the market value, something. You couldn't put merchandise on the sidewalk. And then really, if you really want to hurt your street life, create something that says you're not allowed to have crowds gather on the sidewalk. So obviously we weren't allowed to do anything cool. So we decided to take a weekend and break every law we could, right? And so we painted our own bike lanes. We added our own outdoor cafe seating, our own historic lighting. Next slide. We took all those empty buildings and we put our own coffee shops and flower shops and art galleries. Then we printed off all those rules we were breaking. We put them in the windows. And then we invited the city staff and city officials out. Said, come to our big block party. We thought we'd probably go to jail, but we thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of at least tell a story, like it'd be on the front page of the paper, these community in jail for trying to make a better place, right? But what happened was they actually said, we don't know why we do all these things, and we should fix this community and do things better. They started changing the rules for us. Some of the businesses we created, this is one of them called Oil and Cotton, is now permanent. It wasn't really allowed there before, but the city just let them stay, and now they are an anchor for the area, doing all kinds of activities in the community. And the buildings that were all empty, and then a lot that weren't allowed to have a retail on the bottom, now are all leased up within a week's after the project. So while I had that Better Block project going on, a lot of people said, well, you know what, that's great. You did that in when it was nice out in the spring, but it wouldn't work in Dallas in the summer when it gets hot. So I said, well, let's try this again. We'll try it when it's 40 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees outside. I'll take another street, one that's also gray, wide, no sidewalks on one side, broken sidewalks on the other side, a pole with nothing on it, you know, just a bunch of randomness, right? Ugliness. So we took this street and we brought out 42 trees. We brought out 100 bushes to put in the middle of the street to make the street safer to cross. We took old pallets that were in the trash and we turned them into decks. We painted our own crosswalks. You're not really supposed to do that. We added our own art to the poles to make it have something on it. And then we put tables and chairs out under the trees. And we saw that people actually did linger, even when it was 100 degrees outside. They were looking for a place to go and a place to be a community. So just by creating that environment, it was amazing how many people championed us making these changes. And now we're getting those trees in permanently. And we're getting all kinds of activity happening in this area because we just created a real thing for people to experience and feel together. As opposed to a rendering. In fact, if you go to this picture, I love this. What we saw a lot was a lot of renderings in Photoshop and SketchUp of how cool our place could be. But this is real. This is not Photoshop. Those are real trees, you know, real people bicycling, real crosswalks. And it was the thing is, it was easy for us to go back to the city and say, as opposed to bringing out more consultants, do more planning and more talking, just saying, hey, just do this. And they're like, oh, you've already done the meetings, you've already got the community together, you've already created a vision, we can make that happen. So a lot of the energy and effort that gets put into kind of the talking and the discussions, we just changed and put that energy into the action. And again, what was cool for me was a lot of the businesses that were on the ground there, they understood exactly what we were talking about. The cities can move a little slower because they've got a lot of processes, but the businesses can move pretty fast. So I had businesses before that had bars on the windows, had weeds that were overgrown, and then so if you go next slide, they started taking the bars off the windows, creating outdoor seating, making the place more inviting. We had other buildings that had been vacant or empty for years with graffiti, again, more weeds, mirrored glass. Within weeks, they were turned into little businesses in the area that are now permanent. So again, just by kind of creating a temporary vision, we were actually able to get people to buy into the potential for the place. So really what we stumbled upon was this idea of a process to make change happen fast. Again, I wasn't an urban planner or any kind of expert in placemaking, but I think we all know what great places look like and feel like, and so you don't necessarily have to be an expert on those things, and the beauty of this temporary process was it was the chance for us to try things out as a community and not make any assumptions that this is going to work, because I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I want to at least experiment a little bit. This was an example, too, of a project where I had a dog park, a community that wanted a dog park. They talked to the city about it, and the city said it would take years, cost thousands of dollars, a lot of planning, a lot of studies. They came to me and they said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, why don't we just turn this field across the street from where we're standing, which is a dumping ground. People are throwing trash in. They're not supposed to, but they are. Why don't we turn that into a dog park? And they said, that's great, okay. We'll do some meetings, we'll raise some money, and maybe a few months, if we're lucky, we'll have a dog park. And I said, well, why don't we just do it next weekend? So we did. We just mowed the grass. I found out the trick to a dog park, they're not really that complex. It's just it's a fence. So if I can build a gate and a fence, I can build a dog park. But beyond that, I found out if I made them for people and not for dogs, more so than for dogs, they would get used even more. So we built swings and all kinds of great amenities. for people in the park. And because we did this temporarily, like a pop-up park, this is now a permanent dog park that's being built in our community. And we keep the pop-up parks going throughout the neighborhoods too, to kind of get more dog parks happening as well. One of the big things that we learned through our projects was that our city had this motto. Dallas had a motto that was "Think Big," and we didn't like that because that took a lot of time and took a lot of energy and required millions of dollars on big things. And we wanted actually 100 little things. And because we found out that this idea of thinking small actually played more into what we wanted as a community. We found the places that we loved around the world, whether it was in Paris or San Francisco or Copenhagen or Mexico City, often were this one block that we loved that was full of 100 amazing little things. So like a little cafe, a little flower shop, art gallery, a little bookstore, a pocket park, a fruit stand. It was pretty much the same thing every place we went. And so we thought we can probably build 100 little things in a community together, as opposed to just focusing our energy on one big thing. And a lot of our ideas came from looking at Times Square, what's happening in New York, how those temporary projects were occurring. And we found it was best for us, as opposed to thinking years, to think days. So here's what we do now in our projects. We work fast. We commit to ideas in days. Like, how can we make this a better place in 30 days? And the interesting thing is when you do that, if you tell people I want to do something in a year, you will come up with all of the worst case scenarios and all the problems that are going to occur, and you will never do anything. If I say I'm going to write a book in a year, it will never get done. But if I say I found for me personally, like if my house is really messy, and I'm like, how am I going to clean this? It's going to take me weeks. My kids messed it all up. I call all my friends and say, I'm going to have a dinner party tonight. It's amazing how fast I clean my house. So all your distractions go away, right? We get out of the town halls and go right to where the problem is, on the street. And we identify how to fix that together. And two ideas that we got from a guy named Jaime Lerner out of Curitiba, Brazil. He said, because a problem we faced in all of our projects was, you know what? Everybody would say, we just need money. That's how we fix everything. And what we found was that was always a problem for us. And so if that was the problem for us, we found it was the problem for everybody. How was everybody able to resolve these issues knowing that they all had problems finding money? And he said, and we found this to be true, if you want innovation, you want really great stuff, take a zero away from your budget. If you want ultimate innovation and sustainability, take 2 zeros away from your budget. And so the way you get things done when you start taking zeros away from your budget, you keep that deadline out there. You still say we're going to do something, but you start having co-responsibility. You bring a bunch of people and resources into the mix to help you. Like I brought 100 artists to help me do an art show, and all just paint one piece. And again, it was the Times Square project. The interesting thing was they just used paint and planters and chairs. They just played with those 3 variables. So inexpensive and testing ideas. And that's really kind of all we do. We just play with the environment using cheap temporary materials. We also do use something else that's real simple. As opposed to doing a lot of drawings and renderings, we use chalk, things that we can buy at toy stores. We draw out in the streets. And then when people tell you, well, how do you know it's going to work when you draw this, this pedestrian space here and this bike lane here? Like, cars aren't going to do well in this. We just take orange cones and we put them out there where the chalk is. And we say, and we watch how cars work. And we say, oh, they're working just fine, or they're not working. So if they don't work, we move the cone. So it doesn't take a lot of analysis. We use things like white tape, spray chalk. We'll use fabric to change the streets. Also, people ask you, how do you find the people in your community to help you get things done? We found this is a great quote from Lucille Ball. If you want something done, ask a busy person to do it. And this is really the truth. Busy people tends to be the ones that are used to doing a lot of things. The people that, when I ask to help, that have a lot of free time, don't often commit to the changes I want. So if you're ever looking for the champions in your community, they're usually the busiest people you've ever met. Another reason why I talk about why it was important for us to also take a zero away from our budget, we learned that it was better for us if somebody just gave us money there's an example of a sign that we had in Virginia. That a community said they wanted to fix this sign that had been turned off for 40 years. The light bulbs were broken. Electricity wasn't working. They came to us. We found a foundation that said they'd give us $10,000 to fix it. And we said, we can't, don't take the money because we need the community to actually work together to help us fix this sign. And they need to help tell the story on why it's important to fix this. So let's do like car washes together. Let's go out and have them all tell the story and have them understand why this is important to fix for the neighborhood. And what happened was we found people that came out and said, look, I'll donate a crane. And somebody else said, I'll donate light bulbs. And somebody else said, you know, I'll donate work on the electricity. And so what happened was we had the community fix it together. And so we lit the sign after 40 years. And this was just a few months ago, actually. And so everybody felt a shared ownership of the space. So it was important for us not just to get money from somebody and just fix something, but to actually have everybody help us pull together to make something better. Okay. I've also had projects. This was a warehouse where we had a developer come in and said, you know, this warehouse makes no sense. It's just a trucking warehouse. It needs to go away. We knew he was going to tear it down and nothing was going to happen. It was going to sit empty for years, and while he waited for like land development to occur around him. So I asked some friends if we could use this space as it was now and do another art show inside of it. So we did. And again, that art conspiracy thing we started with friends at the Texas Theater, now it has become a regular event. It's really popular. And we go and find old buildings and we do these projects. We bring thousands of people out now. Because we did that project, the property owner saw the potential for the building, and he turned around, he made it into like this restaurant row. So we do all these small restaurants inside of it. So he was able to repurpose that building just by us showing that it could be used as it is now. Again, to kind of stress the point that we're not the experts on these things, we find all these tools now. These are friends of ours in San Francisco with a group called Code for America that has created an application called streetmix.net. You can go online, and you can actually draw your own street. And you can draw how it is now, and you can add all kinds of new infrastructure. We use these online tools, and we work with the community and say, let's draw up the street and show how it possibly could be, and let's build it together in a new way. We also we take the principles that we learned from like Gale architects that said nothing matters unless it's been counted. So we count things. We count like our own. We do our own speed tests. We do our own decibel meters. We use traffic modeling. We find cities like to have that, and that's great and all. And that helps us kind of understand how things are getting better. But for the most part, everybody knows what's good. You don't necessarily. I don't believe in that idea of you have to count something. If you taste something, you know if it tastes good or not. I don't need to have the exact kind of understanding about why that is the case. So again, I just do this because I know cities want this from us. So we have data to back up. But I think a lot of things that are qualitative can't necessarily be counted. Okay, everybody wants us to count. Okay. This is another example of a street. I'm just going to show a few more projects. This is one in South Dallas. This was an area that suffered a lot of poverty, had a lot of drug use and alcohol. And it was a part of town that, if you see like weeds overgrown, empty phone booths, again, liquor stores everywhere. I went out there with my business partner and we talked about doing a project here. And he said, I don't want to be here. It feels dangerous. And I said, well, we got to figure out a way to fall in love with this area. So we rode our bicycles around. And while we were there, we found these little tiny churches with gospel music. So we thought, we got gospel music here. That's good. Because everybody likes gospel music, right? And then we also found that we found these guys that were sitting on the front porches of their homes cooking barbecue because their gas was turned off. So we have barbecue outside. So we decided to throw a gospel barbecue, right? You know. It was a better block in gospel barbecue. And so we took that street and we just made it into a place that was more inviting. And then we let the community come out and celebrate what they already did good there. So we had them barbecue out in the street. And then we had the gospel choirs start to play there as well. And the kids, we had them sit outside and enjoy the public space that was improved as well. And we used materials, again, that we just found in the area. We do all these projects it's so small, the budget. we found those plants. They were all in the trash. They were being thrown away from the state fair that was just a block away. And so, again, we're always doing projects. This is a project I was just doing 2 weekends ago for my birthday. Because now I'm never at home anymore because I get to go to all these other great places. The only way I can do things at home still is if I do it during my birthday. Right? This was another project where I had a street that had a 5-point intersection. It was really wide, and we talked to the community about making a plaza and thinning the street. And so again, we just set to work in a few days, and we found some old billboards with vinyl. We made crosswalks out of them. We brought some public art in from an artist that had come to town, and this was in storage, and just brought it out to the street. So then we ended up, again, we fixed the street. Before, you can see how it looks without that. If you envision it, it was really wide. And now it felt safe and people could cross. These are just trash bins we painted white and put plants inside of. And the artists in the community help us make the crosswalks, again, put them out in the streets. So we were able to watch how these things work together, and the community became the experts on urban planning. And what's happened because of this work, people in our neighborhood just expect to have better public spaces because they've helped build them now. They are much more educated on these things. And this was the public plaza we created. So, we strung Christmas lights. Again, we just used things that we had in the neighborhood. We let, tables and chairs, and did a market outside and showed how it could be a better place. And this is the last project I'm going to talk about. This is a park. So I'm doing time. Fine. This is a park that was in San Antonio, Texas. We were working on a better block project that was up here in the corner. And the problem I faced with this park was that nobody was really using this. And I talked to the people that were helping me, my volunteers, and I said, why does nobody use this park? And they said, well, there's no kids here, and there's nothing to do there. So I thought, okay, well, let's take some time out of our project and see if we can do something with this park. So I found some old tires, because you can find tires everywhere, especially in my community. And I thought, let's take these tires, we'll paint them just these crazy colors, and we'll hang them from the trees. 20 minutes after hanging the tires, their kids came out of from nowhere, just like saying, oh, wait, there's swings. So it was amazing that we were, again, told that there were no kids there, and their kids were everywhere. They were waiting for an invitation, right? What was really frustrating for me was that the newspaper came out, and they didn't talk about our project. They talked about the tire swings the whole time. So I was like, oh, okay. So that Better Block project that we started in my community, that was really just, again, a chance for us to break the rules a bit and test some new ideas. It started happening all over the country, all over the United States. We open sourced the idea so anybody could do it. We didn't want to trademark it or anything. And then within the next year, it started going all over the world. And it went to Tehran, Iran, and Australia. And it's funny, my friend in Tehran who was asking me, asked me about breaking the rules. I was like, I don't know about breaking the rules in Tehran, Iran. The stakes might be higher. So, okay, I'm going to go back to that streetcar story though, real fast. So this is a lot of. I talk about this all the time. A lot of these things that I've done have happened in a relatively short amount of time, like 5 or 6 years. All those projects. And the teams that I usually assemble are pretty small. It's not a lot of people. We don't necessarily raise a lot of money. We just kind of assemble. We gather the people in our community, and we set to work really fast. This guy up front is my friend Scott Griggs. He's a lawyer who helped me print off all those rules we were breaking and put in the windows. He is now the city council member. He was elected official. So you can break the rules, and you can become an elected official. The gentleman in the back is one of my good friends who's the civil engineer that donated his time for that project. He donated free time to help build a study for us, and this other is another friend of mine. But when we decided to apply for some grants from the federal government to bring the streetcar or the trolley back, we told the city of Dallas we were going to do this. They said, good luck. It'll never happen. We had a extremely small, a 0.3% chance of getting any money at all, getting anything happen at all. So they kind of laughed us off. And what happened was we won millions of dollars and brought the streetcar back. And so I tell people all the time, all I did was build a website, and we assembled a community based on a website. And now what we have is a real transit system being built that will be running next year, in 2015 in spring. And what's happened too is we have all these new buildings coming in along the rail line, this new investment coming into the area as well that wasn't happening before. So new jobs and new things happening, again, based on a website. It's also taking those same ideas, using that same process. I've helped create a restaurant with friends, that we didn't have a lot of money, and we set a short deadline and we just put it out there. And now it's a successful restaurant in our community. So this same ideas and premises apply even in business. I also got to go to have lunch with the First Lady, Michelle Obama. I ran for U.S. Congress based on the same ideas. I didn't win, so you don't necessarily always win. We got in the Venice Biennale and all kinds of great things. So I was thinking at the time, like, wow, I figured out these great tricks. Like, what can stop me? Right? You can do anything with these kind of ideas on getting things done. But the one thing that completely stopped me was in 2012, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. So I was completely stopped. Nothing happened for me at that point. And I remember I was really sick and thinking, gosh, what was all this stuff for? I was doing all this work, and I thought great things were going to happen, but now I've got nothing going. Now I'm not going to get to ride my streetcar. I'm not going to get to see my kids grow up. But I found out what all that stuff was for when I was building all those things. It was actually, I was trying to create a neighborhood. And what happened was whenever I started doing all these things to help my community, they started coming out to help me. And they did a Build a Better Jason campaign to help fix me and help me pay for my bills and all kinds of stuff. And in February of last year, I was diagnosed as being cancer-free, so I'm okay now. But I sometimes forget to tell people that story, and they're like, oh no, he's dying on stage. So yeah, it's been a great exercise for me to realize that a lot of this stuff really is for a greater purpose. It's not about just making a better physical environment. It's about having a better social environment as a community. Okay, so the tricks I've learned to get things done, it's really simple because I like to make sure people know the steps to get things done. First of all, this is the most important: show up. If you don't show up, she will, and she's opposed to everything. Right? And I found this to be the case that most people don't show up. And the interesting thing is, too, if you guys have ever done this, you've done any kind of work, you start with, like, I want to do something big, and you'll have your first meeting, and there'll be 30 people. And you'll have a second meeting, there'll be 15 people. In the third meeting, there'll be 7 people. In the fourth meeting, there'll be 3 people. And you'll be like, nobody believes in my idea. The reality is, people don't tend to show up. Oh, you go back one more. That's fine. No, you're fine. We can get to that. That's the second step. The most people don't show up. And so the thing is that those 3 people that stick around at the end, those are your champions. Those are the doers. It's not bad having just a handful of people around, because at that point, everybody else in the room, the other 30 people, have designated you the leaders. And they're okay with whatever idea, because you've been the representatives at this point. As long as they've been brought into the first meeting and they've been talked to, they typically feel okay with what's going to happen as long as you keep communicating. All right, next slide. Second step was to give the project a name and make it look authoritative, make it look real. Design was key. You're Danish, so you do a great job with design. So I had great logos: Oak Cliff Transit Authority, Bike Friendly Oak Cliff, Art Conspiracy. We had a guy who had some buildings in our neighborhood. He just gave them a name: Bishop Arts District. Because it had a name, it became a thing, right? People championed it and supported it and put it out there. So give your ideas a name that people can get behind. And the last one, this is the most important, is set a date and publish it. I call it blackmail yourself. It's real simple. And make it a short date. Don't do something beyond 90 days. I say 30 days, but I typically try to do projects in 30 days. The bulk of the work happens 48 hours before. But 30 days, but if you do, 90 is fine, but don't overthink things. Don't overtalk, don't give, just what you do is I make the poster, I make the Facebook invite, I put it out there, and people tend to see it and say, hey, I want to help, how can I get involved? And you start assembling your little team based on the people that are excited about the vision you've put out there. So create a vision with a deadline and just rush toward it, and you'll figure out how to get things happening. And again, that's how I've done this with so many projects. And then you start blackmailing everybody else. So if people come to that first meeting and don't come to the second one, make sure you use Facebook and you say, Joe said he's going to build a coffee shop. It'll be exciting. And Joe's like, oh no, I've got to build a coffee shop. All right. And that's all from me, guys. Thank you. That was real short. Is that okay? So. I thought I made that an hour, but yes, please. Because I was supposed to go an hour and I went 35. I talk so fast. See? So ask me 25 minutes of questions. Yes, go ahead.
These buildings you occupy with derelict shops and so on, you just sort of squatted them. Didn't the owners oppose to it?
No. What I did is I talked to the property owners ahead of time. I said, these buildings have been empty for months or years. Can I borrow them for just 2 days? And build something that I wish we could always have in this space. And you can treat it as the owner like a chance to show off the buildings, like an open house. So you bring people in and maybe they'll rent the space from you. Now, my ulterior motive, what I wanted to happen was I wanted those businesses to stay that I was creating. So the property owners were fine with that. They said, good, people will come in and out of my building and see my space. That's great. They were concerned about people getting hurt or liability. So I took out insurance, event insurance, to cover the 2 days for the event itself. But once they had all these people come in and out of the space, they're like, this is great. People started renting the spaces really fast. They have now become very much excited about any time I say I want to do a better block project. They're like, hey, please use my building. Other questions? Yes.
I have a question about the organization, because the Better Block team, is that a kind of organization, or how do you organize it, or is it a group? Or, yeah.
So that's a good question. So the Better Block itself is kind of just a project that we said anybody can do. So we don't have to be the ones that run it. The people who did the one in Iran and Australia, they run their own projects. We have a website called betterblock.org that you can kind of see other projects happening around the world. So that's that, but we also have our own consulting agency called Team Better Block for whenever people ask us to help curate projects. Now, when we curate those, we don't necessarily lead the projects because we found that it's best for the projects that work the best are the ones where the community takes ownership and says, we will own this and run this. So we just really help with the city logistics, the insurances and permits and ideas and concepts to put on the ground. But we really try to work with the city to not block the stuff that goes on. So yeah, two different kind of groups. Better Block is a thing that's free, and Team Better Block is a consulting agency. Yeah. Yes.
How do you get the finances for it? Because
So,
you do buy things. And
yeah, but I think you'd be surprised at how little we spend. What we do is we'll find out, like that project with the trees that you saw we did. I found landscape architects that were living in the community, and I asked them if they had any trees I could use for this project temporarily, and they said, well, okay, yes, we have a big project at a hotel on the other side of town, so we can allow the trucks to drive through the neighborhood and the trees to fall off the truck for the weekend, and so we put them all out and we just displayed them. And so we get really creative by talking to the community and finding out who the people are that could help us get things done. And since it is temporary, people are typically able to allow us to borrow things. The labor is about the only thing I have to figure out. I have to get creative on finding ways to cover. But even then, oftentimes, like the landscape architects, it was a chance for them to market their business. So they used it like a commercial. They said, hey, we do landscape architecture. So they covered the costs of the labor. I think all total, I might have spent $1,500, $2,000 on that project. And I can go around to enough people in my community with a hat, $200 here, $200 there, to cover that. And that covers like generators, portable toilets, insurances, and things like that. Everything else is, again, we manage that equation of co-responsibility. I bring a lot of people in the mix and say, you guys take this, and you take this, and you take this. And you try to get a lot of people come in and do one little piece of the project. There's an interesting Soren Schmidt, is that right? You know Soren? He would watch my TED Talk, and he applied the ideas to show up, give it a name, and put a date out there to a project in Roskilde. He told me about it. It was around a lake there, and he said that I did the same thing. I did everything you said, and the planners came out and they watched how people used it, and they changed the plans of the lake, and we got 5 million kroner based on this event we did, and now we're getting this permanent change to the lake. So I thought that was pretty fascinating that this process does help influence change and get people thinking about how things could be better.
So is that your focal point? I mean, such as a criteria that the experiments need to end up as permanent?
No. Yeah, it's no. I mean, I think initially I thought that was the case, but what I found, I love when things do become permanent. That isn't always the case. What happens in every case is that we've raised the social capital for the area. People are now talking, people are engaging. There's a conversation about public space that's occurring that wasn't occurring before. People start showing up more to town hall meetings and start saying, hey, let's get things happening faster. So even if the better block doesn't become permanent, I've often found people that were involved with that go on to do other things, maybe in other blocks, like start their own coffee shop here or their own, planning effort over here, like the dog park. It didn't happen where I put the pop-up dog park, but it happened just a mile or two away. Using the same people. So yeah, it's interesting how just the idea and the conversation sparks something that goes off somewhere else and it grows. Yes.
Yes, so now you've been doing these projects for maybe 5 or 6 years, as I understood you?
Yeah, 3, yeah.
3 years, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, where do you see this movement in 5 years or 10 years? Do you have any kind of vision for?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's funny. I never thought I would be the guy that would be doing all of this because I was supposed to be fixing computers at home. So what it's led to. I've got a group that's helping me put a book together. So I talked about a book earlier, and what we're stumbled on is this process. It seems to be important for us to talk about in order to make change and cultural change occur on a broader sense, not just on public space, but in business and all kinds of things. So, for instance, now we've had businesses come to us and say, how do we get things happening in our business differently? And so what we do is okay, what are your rules? What do you want to have happen? Okay, and then let's work with the people that are already there, and let's identify how can we make this better? How would you improve things? And let them have a time to do things without any rules. And how would you get there in short order? And let's watch what happens and see if things work better. Let's change the rules on the way people use things, because oftentimes we put rules in place years before, and we have no idea why we did it after a while. Like those rules you saw that I talked about, they were done in 1941, 75 years ago, and nobody knew why we were doing them anymore. So that's what I found is there's something important about this, give it a name, give it a short deadline and show up, and not necessarily have a lot of money, because everyone says need a lot of money, and just put something on the ground to start a conversation. And it's going to connect some interesting people and interesting resources together that you never saw before, and things are going to happen. And again, I think, I've been surprised. That was when I met Soren. That was the first time I'd heard that story. But I hear a story every time when I come back someplace. A few months later, I said, hey, we're talking, and now we've got this going on. And it's inspiring for me to see. Because a lot of what was happening in my own community was done out of frustration because nothing was happening. Cool things were happening in New York. Cool things were happening, in Copenhagen and places like that. And nothing is happening in my community. And what I learned was that you guys were looking for changes too, and New York was looking for change. The interesting thing is, my business partner just met with Jeanette Sadiq Khan in New York, who's doing all the plaza plans, and she's like, we should have been using this better block process for our work. And we're like, that's funny, because we thought we should have been using your process for our work. So we're all learning from each other. Yes.
Are you doing something with other organizations or teams like yourself in Parking Day or?
Yes.
Open source idea?
Yes. In fact, Parking Day was one of our early inspirations. We did a Parking Day event in 2009, 2010. So we saw this and we thought, oh, this is great. They're taking just a parking spot. And if you're familiar with parking day, take a parking spot, you feed it, you put money in the meter, and you make it into a little green space. But we thought, the problem in my community is, you know, I have broken streets, sidewalks, and buildings. Like if I just make a little green space on the road, there's nothing to walk. I can make things walkable or bikeable, but there's nothing to walk or bike to. So I had to fix everything, street, the sidewalk, and the building. So we took the ideas of parking day and what was happening for Times Square and these plazas, and we just did it for a block in our own community. What I found was interesting was the guys at Parking Day, they contacted me and said, hey, we're inspired by your work. This is great stuff. And I thought, well, that's funny because I was inspired by your work. And so we've become friends, and now I just spoke at their conference last year in San Francisco called the Adaptive Metropolis. And one of the guys, John, was actually just here. I think he was doing a fellowship with a Gale architects. So yeah, we collaborate. In fact, I'll be next week. I'll be in Miami at the Knight Foundation, who's one of the major sponsors for Parking Day. Parking Day for Rebar, the group that does Parking Day, and they also do. They've done a lot of other great kind of city urban repair projects as well. So, yes.
Just about Dallas. I mean, do you see the sort of grassroots movement that you guys represent? Do you see that sort of higher up now? I mean,
oh yes.
The highway being covered and actually used.
You saw the highway coverage?
I was very, very surprised to see that the project was actually, that it existed in Dallas.
Yes.
People were actually there with small stands and stuff. I thought, this is weird.
Dallas is slowly getting it. So we've helped change the conversation. That's why I talked about like the social capital. And people weren't talking about these things and didn't think we would do these things now. We had a major tollway project that was talked about happening in a park, and now that's being pushed. Everyone is talking about not doing anymore. It's been talked about for 30 years, and it's finally being stopped. And a lot of it was because at the grassroots level, we started having these conversations and people kept saying, we just don't do this in Dallas. So we started just doing it and saying, actually, we do. You just haven't created the environment that allows us to. But to answer that question even better, I have some friends that work at City Hall, and we can't talk a lot in public because they're not allowed to talk to us because we're the activists, right? But we're really good friends, actually. And they've come to us afterwards and they said, because the city manager at our city was very upset with us. Like, oh, don't point us out. And the last thing they wanted is to have an international movement start based on their city being bad, right? But the funny thing was, my friend who's the head of transportation management at the city, he came back and he said, your Better Block project is talked about all the time now at the city. So that for me alone was just like awesome. You know, people now, it's a part of the conversation and you guys have to acknowledge this is an issue. And even worse, oh no, like before we were just trying to kind of control the story and how things work in our city, and now the inmates are running the asylum, right? The prisoners are coming up saying like, no, we should have fountains and we should have bike lanes, and they have to respond to those things. And what's been even better is, since their typical process we found was like, we'll hire some consultants, we'll have these long conversations, you know, a lot of studies, and the studies will end up turn on these rolls and be in City Hall and stuck in a closet because it'll take years and everyone's going to get bored. They found if we just do it in 30 days, we're like, oh, we can't stop these guys. So they end up implementing our ideas a lot faster because we're like, we take away a lot of the work the city has to do. Because we organize the community and we create a vision and we work together to build it. So it makes their work actually a lot easier. So in the end, they might be frustrated, but they're also like, oh, this is like, okay, you want a green space? Give them the green space. They even showed us how to do it. So, but I have kids here. It's an interesting thing. I have kids come up to me all the time and say, I watched your work, I watched your speech, and now I'm going to be an urban planner. I'm like, oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm not an urban planner, so I can't tell you. So, anyways. Other questions?
Or we can take a little break.
Okay.
Let's have a short break, 10 minutes.
Very good.
Jason, stay here.
Thank you. Thank you.